Chapter 30. Once Brenda Wyatt had returned from Miami, she made a decision. Although she had not talked to her father specifically about MacLeod and her feelings for him, just the fact that she had been in a family atmosphere for a couple of days helped her to reach that decision. She was in love with MacLeod. She thought of him now under that name rather than Nash. That much she admitted to herself. And Brenda Wyatt believed that when you were in love with someone, you told them so, in order that they could tell you of their feelings. It was possible, very possible, that MacLeod could not stand the sight of her. Certainly, their meetings up until that point had not been models of polite and interesting exchanges of views. They had been more like minor battles. But still, she knew she was reasonably good-looking. She had brains, and she was only a bitch a very small part of the time. He might just find something to like in her. There was only one way to find out. She dressed in her killer suit, the one that made Bedsoe's eyes start out of their sockets and started him sweating. It was a very tight skirt. Then she took a cab to the antique shop and walked right in. Rachel was there, sitting in her usual place at the back of the shop. She rose and walked to where Brenda stood. "I want to see him. MacLeod, Nash. I want to speak to him," she said fiercely. She saw Rachel's face turn to stone, and she knew she was going to have a fight on her hands. A man is never better protected than by a devoted woman who is determined that none shall pass by her. Well, thought Brenda, I can be tough too. Well, I'm afraid that's impossible, began Rachel in a starchy tone, but she was interrupted by Brenda. God damn it, I need to see him. But Mr. Nash is dead, Miss Ellenstein. That much I do know. MacLeod came out then, from behind a curtain. What are you doing here? He asked, coldly. Christ, thought Brenda, this is a great start to telling someone you love them. I could not be more welcome if I had pulled a gun and threatened to rob him of the family silver. Still, faint heart never won fair Highlander. I'm looking for a dead guy named Nash. He died at birth in Syracuse, New York. She saw Rachel and MacLeod exchange a look. Then he sighed and held back the curtain. All right, come on. Where are we going? You want to talk to me? We're going to my apartment. She went to him then. The apartment was like the shop, cluttered with antiques. At least, Brenda thought of them as being clutter, but of course, most of the objects could be worth a fortune. Some of the swords looked as though they were 1,000 years old. Are the claymores real? She asked, making a circuit of the sunken lounge. What is this? A museum? This stuff must be worth a fortune. They're all things I collected myself, answered MacLeod. Well, most antique dealers only trust their own judgment. I mean, I have collected it personally, at the time of its manufacture. That claymore there. He pointed to one on the wall. I used against the Frasers in the Battle of Loch Shiel in 1536. She stared into his eyes. Was he teasing her? He did not seem to be. He seemed to be deadly serious. Mad, then. If so, Rachel would be aware of it and would not have allowed the two of them to come up without some warning, surely. He did not look mad. He looked depressed, worn down by cares. What was this all about? What could she accept, and what could she discard? MacLeod told her. I've been alive for 4.5 centuries, and I cannot die. Not a natural death. I cannot even grow old. She made a joke on impulse. Well, everyone's got their problems. He nodded. You don't believe me, of course. And why should you? You've been raised in the knowledge that immortality can only be achieved by getting rid of the earthly form. That works for most, but not for me or my kind. We are trapped. We're freaks of nature. We can't die in the normal way. She did not know what to say to him. She had come here to tell him that she loved him, and now he was revealing things about himself which, if they were true, could not do anything to help either of them, and if they were untrue, brought in a question about the stability of his mind. He went over to the wall and took down a silver dirk. This was my father's, he said. Here, take it. He offered it to her. What for? She shrank from the weapon, wondering what he was going to do next. You want proof of my immortality? Take this and find your proof. She knew then what he wanted to do, what he wanted her to do. She was expected to plunge the dagger into his heart, but she knew that such an act would kill him, and she would not touch the knife. I am Connor MacLeod, of the clan MacLeod, he told her. I was born in 1518 in the village of Glenfinnan, on the shores of Loch Shiel. Do you not believe? He reached across and took her hand. He placed her fingers around the handle of the dirk, holding them there with his own. She felt her arm being raised and tried to struggle, but he refused to let her go. I am immortal, he cried. He brought her hand down with the knife in it, burying the blade deep in his chest. She screamed when she saw that it must have pierced his heart. She expected him to fall, writhing on the floor of the apartment. Instead, he stood stock still, staring into her eyes. Gradually, she managed to peel her own fingers from the hilt of the dirk. She saw him grasp the knife and wrench it from his own breast. There was very little blood. It should have gushed from the wound, but instead it dribbled out, clotting almost immediately. He offered her the knife. Do you want to see it? It might be a trick dagger. No, she said. I could see that it wasn't. I saw the pain in your eyes as the blade went in. I feel pain as keenly as you do. He smiled wryly. It's only death I can't feel. She broke down then, sobbing, and he took her into his arms and whispered, "Darling," into her ear. I'm sorry I had to show you like this. I didn't want to shock you, but it's the only way. I know. It'll take you some time to get used to it. It's not an easy thing to accept. He let her cry herself out before explaining a little more about his life. He told her about Heather and how they had lived together until she had died. The worst part was watching her grow old while I stayed young. That's how it will be, Brenda Wyatt, if you choose to stay with me. The thought appalled her, but she said nothing. He kissed her. Anyway, I may be dead before this week is out, so you won't have to make the decision. The Kurgan will terminate this long run if he can. She gripped him tightly. He will not. You must stop him. MacLeod laughed. I intend to try, but he's the strongest of the Immortals. I'll need a lot of luck, Or faith, she said. Yes, or faith. She pressed her cheek against his. Do I remind you of Heather? He paused, but eventually replied, Yes. I'm glad. I'm not jealous of her. He held her away from him. You cannot be jealous of Heather anyway. She died over 400 years ago. She was my only other love, and we lived a lifetime together. You must not be jealous of her, because she is part of me. I know. That's why I said, but you said it like you were. Brenda admitted to herself that she had been fishing. She had wanted him to reject the Highland girl, the memory, in favor of herself. She realized now, after he had spoken, what a terrible thing she had expected. I'm sorry. Connor, it's all so new, and of course, I want you to myself, even your innermost thoughts. That was very selfish, and I'll try to understand. He smiled at her. Come, let's go out. We'll do what most lovers do when they first discover each other, yet rarely do again with the same sort of enthusiasm. What's that? We'll go for a walk around the zoo. She laughed. Oh yes, it does sound exciting. If you had asked me last week, I should have scorned it. There you are. They went out then and took a cab to the zoo, where they wandered from cage to cage. Suddenly, he stopped and gave out such a heartfelt sigh, she knew something was wrong. What's the matter? She asked. He looked at her sadly. It's no good, Brenda. I can't get involved again. It won't work. But she knew she had him. He was just making a last little struggle. You know what's weird? Most people are afraid to die. That's not your problem. You're afraid to live. He made a helpless gesture. I don't want to lose my head again, he started to say, and then burst out laughing. Someone standing nearby, watching them, also smiled at this remark.